Of course, magic. It's the fun part. And I was like, more! They're my ship. Yeah, now she's confident. So what?
I like that word you just used.
Parochial.
On this outside, do you want it back?
This is your fault, lady. Yours.
Yeah, he looks gaunt in the face. When? How? When? Why?
Put down your tarot cards, young lady.
Hell-O kitty.
Ha ha ha.
Welcome to the Yestalgia podcast. I'm Basil.
I'm Drew.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be talking about The Craft. Quick synopsis of the movie before we start chatting about it. After transferring to an LA high school, Sarah finds her magic is appealing to three witches, Bonnie, Rochelle, and Nancy, who are looking for a fourth to join their makeshift coven. All four girls are dealing with struggles in their personal lives that seem to be fixed by their growing powers. However, these solutions are less appealing than they originally seemed. What is everyone's experience with the movie The Craft? Amanda, would you like to go first?
I chose this movie. I didn't see it in new, and I don't want to go ahead and get started, but I will say that for as many times as I've seen this movie in my life, and as much as I liked this movie as a kid, watching it just now was sort of like watching it for the first time. I had very little active memory of this movie, so.
Cool. Drew, do you want to go next?
Yeah, this is my first time seeing this movie. I know, shocker. But yeah, once again, like others, I have heard of the movie. I knew it was about, but I'd never seen it.
Yeah, we do try and always have somebody who has not seen it. This is surprisingly not my pick, honestly, because I watched this kind of, I believe, like you, Amanda, it was a long time ago, so it's hard to remember. I don't think I saw this in theaters, but I definitely saw it like when it started re-airing, like when you could watch it on television. I know that. And I have seen it many, many times since then. And I was obsessed with it as a tween and teen. So yeah.
Yeah, same here.
So those are our experiences. Anybody want to start on anything specific?
Drew, do you want to kick it off or do you want me to?
Well, here we are again at a LA high school.
With Breckenmeyer.
With our friend, Breckenmeyer. Not such a good guy this time around, though.
Yeah. Basically the opposite.
Yeah.
Hold up. This movie is really the anti-Clueless, isn't it?
Came
out a year afterward, and it is everything. First of all, this movie was rated R, which that kind of threw me. I didn't remember that, but it was just the evil Clueless AU.
They wanted a PG-13 rating. I think that maybe people weren't ready for some of it. And there's some mention of sex and drugs a little bit, sort of. Not really. But then again,
I think there might be the fuck word in there once or twice. I don't know.
Yeah, I know that they were seeking a PG-13 rating when it aired, but they weren't unable to get it for whatever reason. The MPAA is baffling sometimes.
Drew, anything else jump out at you?
I know there's a girl. Well, she was a girl, now she's a woman, from Prison Break. And also the girl, now woman, from the show Half and Half on UPN.
Which person was that?
The only black girl.
Oh, yeah. Rochelle.
Yeah.
Rochelle, is her name Rochelle or Rachel?
Rochelle, which is a little funny because her real name is Rachel. The actress's name is Rachel. It is actually kind of interesting, her casting, because it was sort of like a colorblind casting. So her storyline was actually different when they were first casting. She was supposed to have apparently a bulimia storyline, which, to be fair, I'm glad that didn't happen. Not that it's, a much better storyline, but they did change it to be kind of, dealing with a racist classmate. I just don't know that in that time period, people were that sensitive about eating disorders. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say no. Also, probably about the first 30 minutes of this movie was, like I said, completely almost like watching it for the very first time. I was sitting here thinking, oh, okay, I remember now. They each have a thing. And Sarah's was that she had a suicide attempt, and Nancy's was that she's in like a dysfunctional, kind of impoverished, I'm assuming,
family unit.
Yeah. Bonnie's obviously she had really bad scarring from what we don't know. And then Rochelle hers was just, she's black in this predominantly white school. And it was just kind of like, ain't that a shame? Like, there should be nothing technically, quote unquote, wrong with her. Her problem came from the outside.
Well, and I think one of the problems with that is that her being kind of punished in the end feels fucked up. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like...
fucked up. And also, I did not feel sorry for Lizzie,
Laura.
whatever.
Yeah, I didn't either. Especially because upon watching it the second time, I realized she says when they're doing the spell that causes the girl's hair to fall out, that nothing will happen to her if she leaves Rochelle alone. And then she doesn't. Do that. Yeah. So
Rochelle even mentions when they're making their wishes. I know it's not wishes, but it's sort of like when they're doing their spiritual intent, their magical intent. She even says something along the lines of, give me patience with people who piss me off, or something like that.
It was give me the strength to not hate those who hate me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Kind of something along those lines.
He tried so hard.
And I think like...
It was ironically, the truest spell.
The least shallow, the least personal gain was she going to get from it, right? Mm-hmm. That's partly why I don't love that kind of turn at the end for her. It doesn't make nearly as much sense as it does for Bonnie. And even Bonnie's is kind of a little surprising too. Nancy's makes a lot of sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like you see what's happening and you see the through line of how she gets to this place. You don't for the other two. And they just go along with her. And that would be one thing you could talk about, right? About teenagers kind of going along with things their friends do. That's fine. Except that at the beginning of the movie, they're not always going along with her. They call her out sometimes, like, about the shit she's doing. So, like, why would they not in things that were, like, way more serious? You know what I mean?
And it persisted to the very, very ending scene of the movie. That part disappointed me. Don't get me wrong, I had a lot of fun watching this movie, a lot of fun memories. I liked this movie, but the end scene where I was like, okay, Bonnie and Rochelle have already proven themselves in the beginning and throughout this movie to be essentially good people at their core. And now all of a sudden it's like they're stuck in villain town. And I thought that was bad characterization.
Yeah, I think that's why I don't like the last, third or quarter of the movie as much, because it becomes a little too black and white for me, particularly with the two of them.
After they fake her family's death and do all this horrible shit, they come back and they're like, we're so sorry. Do you still have power? Yeah, it was just a prank. And there for a second, I was like, oh, okay, good. At least they're apologizing and like trying to put their tail between their legs. But then 2 seconds later, they're like, she probably doesn't even have powers. I was like, ugh, I'm kind of disappointed.
I think the movie's strong point is kind of showing these, and it's throughout these scenes, and I wish they kind of explored it even a little more, but the bonding of like teenage girls, and that's something that I think was not done too often at that time in film. And they have these beautiful, complicated relationships. I love it. But like I said, it becomes really black and white at the end where it is, they are bad, Sarah good. And that's frustrating.
It did get ruined. I actually even felt sorry for Nancy because I was like, all of these children need therapy. Especially Nancy. So, yeah. And as you're watching this, so when you're the target demographic for this movie, which I was, you're watching this and you're like, these chicks are so cool. Every fucking thing they're doing is so cool. The very, very opening image of the movie is them passing around these crystal vials and sitting in a circle, and there's incense smoke and candlelight. And from the very first second, you are like, oh, I love these cool girls. And then, Basil, to your point, they also have this very fresh for the time, non-misogynistically portrayed relationship. They are on the level, all these girls. You love that, right? Mm-hmm. Then the end just strikes it down. And I was just like, man, you guys, I could have figured out a million ways to rewrite the ending of that to make it to where you could still recoup that feeling. Maybe not with Nancy, but you could still recoup that feeling of like, oh, cool girl group.
Yeah. Or maybe their relationships would be changed, but not gone 100%, or, Or even if the other two girls chose sides, like if Bonnie and Rochelle chose sides, right? So it was like 2 against 2. I think, to be fair, that's actually a lot more realistic in when your girl group splits, that people take sides. But, well, sometimes they only take one person's side, so maybe it's not that unrealistic. However, I don't think it has the nuance of that kind of thing. Not to bring up a movie that comes later, but in Mean Girls, I think they do a lot better. I mean, they don't do as good on the female bonding. You know what I mean? Like, if I could just smash those two movies together, I feel like they would be the perfect movie that talks about and explains what it's like to be a teenage girl. You know what I mean?
And also witchcraft. Mean Girls, but with witchcraft.
Yeah, of course, magic. It's the fun part.
Which must make it better.
I still do enjoy this film, and I feel like I was watching it and the notes I was taking were not as detailed or critical, because I still think, for the most part, this movie does kind of hold up a little, mostly. Plus, the music is great. It's a lot of bands that I like.
Man, the very opening song, I was like taken. I was taken back to junior high, I guess.
I was a fan of Our Lady Peace, and that's them. And they had like Letters to Cleo. They had a Smiths song, so I prefer the Smiths version, but it is a cover, unfortunately.
Ah, shit, I can't think of the name of the song, but
it's like Love Split Love. Oh, I also wrote in my notes, I ship Bonnie and Rochelle. Because they're the only two during the kind of, I don't know, it's almost like a swearing in sort of thing for Sarah when they do their kind of first ritual. And they're holding I think it's supposed to be an athame or atame. I don't know how to pronounce it. Anyways, the dagger, when they're holding it to each other's like chest, and then I enter the circle with perfect love and perfect, I forget what the other one is. Oh, trust. And then they kiss the other person, but they're the only two that kiss on the lips. And I was like, more.
Dude, I noticed that too. I was like, is she going to go for it with Nancy? Hey, wait a second. Maybe I just uncovered something deep. Nancy does put more space. She turns her head to a remarkable degree, whereas Bonnie and Rochelle, they are smooching. Well, smooching. They smooched.
Oh, yeah. They kiss each other on the lips rather than the cheek, because every other interaction is on the cheek.
Was that on purpose?
I don't know.
Those three were already, it wasn't. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Those three already had an established rapport, and Sarah was like the new guy, so she didn't count.
Yeah, but even when Bonnie does it to Nancy, they kiss on the cheek.
Yeah, exactly. So Bonnie and Rochelle are like touching lips. I think, did they touch lips? I thought it was just like almost. Okay.
Nope, they do. I watched it twice.
Nancy doesn't.
And I'm into it. They're my ship.
Yeah.
I do also like how Bonnie in the beginning looked like kind of stressed out. And she looks very, very, very much like a person who has not done any self-care. And then as soon as that scar is cleared up, she is like, sun's out, guns out, DTF, hello nurse. Anyway, and they did make a lot of jokes that were sort of, what was it? I think Bonnie walks into the classroom and all of the dudes are like, how are you, Bonnie? How are you doing, Bonnie? And I think it's Nancy. One of them was like, yeah, Bonnie, how are you doing?
I think it might have been Rochelle.
It's
hard to say, they're not on screen.
Yeah, there's a little shit.
Yeah. Speaking of that with Bonnie, the other thing is like, okay, there's the part where they're in the car and Nancy's speeding and she's changing the lights from red to green. And Sarah says like, oh, Bonnie, you're so narcissistic. And it's like, you can see like a tiny bit of that, but I really don't think it was explored well enough to feel like that statement is 100% true, if that makes sense. Like we as the viewer have not seen that very much, if that makes sense.
Well, and also it's sort of like, how dare this? Is it safe to say she's a burn victim?
They never say. Chris says, oh, she has burn scars. He's the only one that ever specifies burn scars. So I don't know, because they also are using gene therapy on her, which I don't think would work on burn scars, right? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know much about gene therapy, but it's something somebody's testing. And it's, to be fair, I don't know what gene therapy 100% would fix, but I would assume that were it something genetic, it would be better.
They should have said like stem cell, whatever. But to my point, that comment, I picked up on that too. And I was sort of like, yeah, how dare she be feeling herself like after God only knows how long of being ashamed. I
think the movie is trying to talk about it being shallow in some way. And it's like, on the one hand, I get that. On the other hand, she has been bullied for this. Like, who knows for how long? Because if it's genetic, it's probably been her whole life, right? Or most of it. Yeah, now she's confident. So what?
Fuck her. In sarcasm.
And I think it's interesting because it does feel like, okay, this movie is supposed to be like girl power and like whatever, but it sometimes is misogynistic itself. You know what I mean?
In 1996, you could not get away from that. You couldn't. I don't know what made it so impossible for people at the time. This movie kind of tries. It goes way south, but it does a good job in the beginning, and even that was tough.
Yeah.
In 1996, girls were supposed to fucking hate each other. It was a scientific fact. It's 76 degrees outside and girls all hate each other. I feel like that's just the way it was.
Well, and I think sometimes we do, but it's not any less nuanced than any other relationship even adults have, right? Like, it's probably more dramatic because teenagers are dramatic, right? But yeah, it was seen as that is like the only thing that happens between females, I guess, or young girls, I'll say, or teenage girls particularly. And that, like I said, part of what I like is that it does show the other side of female friendships. Like, it's never one or the other, right? Any friendships realistically are never always great, right? But to only focus on the negative is unfair. There are some really positive things about your friendships in high school, you know? Also, how was Nancy allowed to have a noose in her locker? Like, how did she not get in trouble for that?
She was also allowed to just blaze a big fat square in the community courtyard at lunchtime or something, and nobody said shit. The surprising thing about this movie is you would think that in this, let's also jump on this. These girls, for people who haven't seen this movie, this little coven of girls is nestled within the bosom of a Catholic school. Some of the teachers are full-blown nuns. They're teaching them like French and shit. They
have mass. They go to mass.
They full-blown go to mass. And these girls just are not getting in trouble by nobody.
Which is super surprising. If you watch it again, some of the earlier scenes in school, there are cops in their school too.
There are cops in their school. Hey, you know what? Probably because it's an all-white school, barring Rochelle.
Okay. I mean, that's sort of part of it. But like, okay, I no longer am, but I did grow up Catholic. And I know Catholics are like, you cannot wear the rosary. And Nancy wears it through a rosary through the whole movie. And like, I don't know, they're doing all kinds of things where it's like, really, did no one say anything at all to anyone about, because I just remember for myself, I was in high school after this, but not that far after this. And I went to a public school, and they were very strict sometimes about these kinds of things and like what you wore. So I'm like just so surprised that in a parochial school, it wouldn't be more strict, right?
I like that word you just used.
What?
Parochial?
Yeah, it means like a religious school. It is a non-denominational, but they go to mass, so I'm assuming it's Catholic. I just found it so surprising. I was in middle school around this time, and they were policing our clothes then too. Because around the late 90s, early 2000s, those tiny, tiny spaghetti strap tank tops were really in. And in middle school...
midriff shirts.
Yeah, less so when you're in middle school, to be fair. But I remember you could never get anything at the store but those teeny tiny strap tank tops. And it would be hot in the summer. And we got in trouble because our bra straps were showing. And we were like 13, 12, 11, I don't know, whenever you start. I forget when you start 7th grade because we had 6th grade in elementary school at that point. But they would get mad at us because our bra straps were showing. And it's like, okay, should we just not wear any, even though we are developing? It's like, young girls, like, I don't get it.
I was in the principal's office for dress code violations on the daily, like constantly. That might as well have just been one of my scheduled classes. Go to the principal's office and have them measure the distance between your kneecap and the bottom edge of your flannel baby doll dress.
Yeah. Yeah, like, and I guess that's why I find it so surprising that they are not policed at all on their clothing, because during that time, it was bad.
They cracked way down on our cigarette smoking, too, let me tell ya.
Yeah, well, I would just go down to the local church and sit there because nobody would bother you if you were sitting on church steps. I'm just admitting what a bad kid I was. I mean, the people who worked there, you know, the priests and whatever, they were always fine. They were like, okay, that's fine. I think they were just glad we weren't doing drugs. I just really love this movie, and I loved the way Nancy looked, and I wanted to look just like her. Honestly, I would have looked like any of the girls. They're all beautiful, but you know, Nancy was the spooky girl, and I was really into spooky stuff. And I wanted to be her so bad, even though I know she was a villain. Like, even then, because teenagers don't have quite the capacity for as nuanced thinking. Not that they don't have any.
She deserved a better ending than what she got.
Yeah.
So here's a movie that has Nev fucking Campbell in it. And here comes Fairuza Balk stealing the show. Every second that she was on screen, I was completely satisfied. Like, the whole movie, here's the crack, 1996. The whole movie could have been her just dead-eyeing the camera, walking straight up to the camera, flipping it off, and then walking the fuck away. And I would have been like, bravo, bravo, queen. She was magnificent. All of this hysterical stuff that she did, it was borderline, I don't want to say comical, but it was borderline over the top at some point, but yet it was still believable. Like, I still believed there was a real person that could really just be freaking the fuck out like she is at the end. Like, you're pathetic. Oh, you're weak, weak, weak. It was over the top, but I bought it. She stole everything she was in. Magnificent.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of the really crazy shit doesn't happen until the end. And we're essentially seeing someone's demons consume them is the idea, right? So I don't mind so much that she gets kind of crazy at the end because that is the point. And she gives kind of a fascinating performance. I think in general, like, the performances in this are good.
Very good, yeah. And I agree, Basil. I also thought that I was a Nancy. And in rewatching this movie, I realized that I was the homeless guy with the snake.
Sorry. Okay.
On this outside, do you want it back? That's me. Drew, which high school witch do you resonate with? Are you also a Nancy?
No. And about her, the only thing I found wrong with her, well, not wrong, but one thing that kind of got to me was when she spoke nasally. I was kind of, I didn't really like that.
Kind of in the back of her throat.
Yeah.
I loved her. I loved even the annoying things about her.
It's usually when she would get kind of whiny that she'd get that.
Yeah, when she's making fun of people.
Yeah.
I like Rochelle. But like I said, she's like the most innocent of them all. Her spell was even the least harmful, really. And if the girl had stopped messing with her, then nothing would have happened to her.
Yeah.
It was a self-defense spell, pretty much.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's why I don't get it. Like, her character arc makes the least sense, I think, out of all of them.
The fact that she basically became Power Rangers reference incoming, the skull to Nancy's bulk. She's basically a henchman. She chose the wrong side and was bad because she was following Nancy.
Henchman is a good word.
It really doesn't make sense, too. Yeah, they become her henchmen. You're right.
Yeah.
I do think even more the way it doesn't make sense that Rochelle of all of them would even go along with Nancy is that she's horrified about what's happening to Laura.
Right.
Like, so why would you keep going along with everything? She shouldn't be. Laura deserves it.
In the real world, they'd probably be split 50-50. She would have gone with Sarah and Bonnie would have gone with Nancy, or they both would have gone with Sarah.
That's what should have happened.
That's this movie.
Yeah. So they did make I don't know what you would even call it. It's kind of a sequel. And they do something a little more like that, where everyone's like, girl, you're, I guess, I don't know. I read the synopsis and I think that's what happens. Where they're like, girl, you're going too far. But it's particularly sad because, I don't know, like that one scene, two things are happening, right? Like they're doing the spell against Laura, right? And she's braiding the hair into Rochelle's hair. And then there's the part where Bonnie is like, oh, Manon, please remove my scars. Please remove my scars. And Nancy's like, oh God, girl, I'm so sorry, you know? And it's like, when there are scenes like that, where it's like, these are women who are being really vulnerable with each other, young women, of course, but being really vulnerable with each other. And those are the kind of things where I felt like this feels so real. You know what I mean?
It's so good too. On your point, even in the very beginning, before we get to that scene, when they meet Sarah, somebody, I think it's Rochelle, immediately is like, you slit your wrist, and somebody else is like, you even did it the right way. And was it Nancy?
Yeah.
And even that scene to me felt good because when they see her slit wrists, they kind of laugh a little bit and they're like, ha 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 ha, yeah, like we get her. Surface level, it almost seems like edginess. Like, oh, you slit your wrists, how edgy, come into our group. But rewatching it, it almost felt like they were reassured by seeing her scars because they were like, you are in pain like us. It wasn't so much of an edgelord thing as it was, this girl's hurting. So are we.
I would say that they're not laughing like at her in any way either, right? Like they're just making kind of light of it a little bit.
They're definitely not laughing at her, and they're not like, oh, you tried to slit your wrist, so cool, like badass, man. No, they just sort of acknowledge.
Well, Nancy does say, punk rock.
She kind of says it like that throughout the whole movie about everything, though. Like, anytime a teacher speaks to her, she has some sort of, insert jack-off fist motion. But that's sort of how I interpreted it on the rewatch. They could have made it to where, like, ooh, that's so spooky and edgy. You tried to kill yourself. But I think it felt to me more like a bonding thing. Come into our group.
That is likely where it was stemming from. Knowing everything that happens now, and watching the movie, I do think that's where it's coming from. I do think that Nancy was never going to be vulnerable to somebody that she just met. And she tries not to be vulnerable with anybody at any time, realistically, which I think is part of her transformation. She does not want to be vulnerable. And that is part of why she ends up kind of going mad with power. Because now she can be in control when the rest of her life feels really out of control. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she wasn't vulnerable to anybody. She, at one point, was sort of like administering the care in that scene that you just brought up with Bonnie, when she's sort of in fetal position going, please get rid of my scars, please get rid of my scars. And she's doing this hand motion behind her back.
And she has like maybe an oil or something on her hands. Yeah.
Yeah. And she is convincingly, like you can tell in that scene, she's in the moment with Bonnie. She's being genuine.
Yeah.
With her mom. When the stepdad tries to throw hands with the mom, she is like, oh no, you fucking didn't. We see Nancy a couple of times as a defender / caregiver, but we never ever see her in that vulnerable position like we see, let's say, Bonnie rocking back and forth in front of the fire and kind of having a little bitty meltdown.
It's interesting because it's very clear that all the girls other than Nancy are kind of open about what's going on with them, right? Like whatever troubles are going on with them, their group knows it. It sounds a little like they don't know what's going on with Nancy because if you remember, Rochelle goes, I don't know. I think her wish was to not be white trash. And it's like, well, girl, you're white. Like, what are you going to do about it? So it seems like it's more like she doesn't understand that her home life is really bad right now and that her mother is an alcoholic and her stepdad is a fucking creep. So yeah, I think it's sad to see it, really. Like I do, especially now as an adult, have more of an appreciation in general for Nancy. And I think they did a pretty good job in general. Again, I think it goes a little far at the end, but with kind of showing someone's kind of descent into something, right? Where it starts out kind of from a genuine place or like feeling out of control or whatever. It seems like if you don't understand the nuance, it seems like Nancy is asking for power's sake, right? And that's not really what's happening. It is needing control in a situation where she has like no control over her environment.
She wants to fix a problem.
She wants to have the power to fix the problem too.
Right. And in receiving that power, her next step was, let's see how far I can push this shit. It was almost like an anger reaction.
It's almost like it felt good and she didn't want to give it up and she wanted it more. You know what I mean? And like, that's not a crazy thing. That feels like it tracks with a human psychology, if that makes sense.
She wanted to be vindicated.
Yeah.
Or maybe, maybe that's not the right word.
Kind of works. Are snakes common in LA?
Yeah. Okay.
Are snakes common in LA?
I think so.
No, nothing is common in LA.
You mean no animals? There's animals that live there.
Why do you say that?
No animals live in LA. It's only cars.
I mean,
okay.
The flag for California has a bear on it, so.
Well, that's California.
Yeah, there are some very wooded parts of mostly Northern California, so.
Yeah, there are some parts of California that are actually Canada.
Are you talking about Washington and Oregon?
Yeah.
They're called Washington and Oregon.
No. But there are, like, Northern California is closer to, like, Washington and Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's where they get the pretty bad wildfires, usually. But it all kind of travels down, so.
I now know what you mean by the no animals in LA. That's mostly city.
Yeah.
But even cities, there are animals in cities.
Yeah.
Fucking pigeons. I'm in Florida. Every time I open up my front door, there's a goddamn werewolf.
Okay. I was asking because of the movie where the guy, like, keeps having snakes. And I'm like, are they just, like, around?
Okay, that guy, we're back in.
I don't know. Are we back in, Drew?
We're back in. Drew, what were you going to say? This is it. This is the podcast.
Okay.
There may be no animals in downtown Main Street, LA, but outside LA, yeah, where the houses are.
But, like, there are parts of LA that are not as populous, right? Like, I'm pretty sure. I don't know very much about LA.
Neither do I.
I'm gonna be honest.
I don't know anything about California,
Basically
period.
nothing.
Yeah, we keep picking movies that are based in LA.
Yeah, we're on the wrong coast, so. Yeah, because I don't know. Beverly Hills is a part of LA, right? Like, it's a piece of LA, like, it's a neighborhood, right? Like, and there are other places that, like, are named like that are just, like, a neighborhood.
It's like the boroughs in New York.
Yeah. I did kind of want to touch on the character of Chris and that whole thing.
He looks rough nowadays, doesn't he?
Yeah, he looks gaunt in the face.
That's a good word for it. Okay.
Yeah, he's gotten older. I mean, it's not that unusual, I suppose.
I'm all like, you look shit. Basil says he looks gaunt. He had a gaunt life.
No, I mean, he always had those, like, cheeks, those sunken cheeks a little bit. So there's a part after he dies, right? So Chris dies, and we can talk about that in a second, where Sarah's like, oh, I didn't want that to happen. Fine. And then she goes, I think he was a nice guy underneath it all. Excuse me, no.
He was a nice guy as much as Lizzie, what the fuck was her name?
Laura.
As much as that bitch was worthy of forgiveness and redemption.
Yeah. I had such a hard time with it because Nancy's going towards him to, like, push him out the window. Basically, we don't know that initially. And she's like, oh, you call girls whore when you're the whore. And it's like, yeah, girl, get it. You're right. Slow clap. But I mean, ideally, you wouldn't kill him over that. But it's just so crazy to me that they say at some point he's underneath it all a good guy. How? Where? When?
Not at any point.
Yeah.
Like, not in the beginning, not at the end, not in the middle. Like, at no point is he ever endearing in any way, shape, or form. I was actually, when they sat in their circle and made their initial wishes, and Sarah says, I want to be allowed to love myself, and I want to allow others to love me too. And then she puts down a picture of him. I was like, boo, boo, boo.
I mean, she does say, I know it's pathetic. And it's like, well, yeah, girl, that is fucked up.
Burn that picture.
Yeah. The whole he's a good guy thing, I'm like, no. When? How? When? Why? Like, why would you say that? That's untrue. I don't think it's a bad thing that she's mourning that someone died, like, or is upset that that's what happened. Because, like, yeah, that would be really upsetting. Somebody can be an asshole. It doesn't necessarily mean they should die. But to say that he's a good guy, really?
Especially after he did that shit where he kissed her and then she was like, no, I'm good. And then the next day, like, he went to work really fucking quick to slander her, to smear her reputation. Like, the next morning, shows up to school and the work is done. And she's like, she tries to confront him. She's like, hey, dude, what the hell? And he's like, please stop trying to have sex with me, or whatever he says. Be gone.
Yeah, he was basically never even all that nice to her. He was kind of okay. I don't understand what her obsession was. He's cute. I get it, but that can't be it, right? So there is a part where he does try to essay her, and I do find it interesting that the movie blames it on the spell exclusively. Well, at least Sarah does, I guess. Well, no, the movie does.
He tried to get into date rape territory with her in the initial scene, the kissing. This is on par for this guy.
Yeah. And I don't think he 100% did. Like the first one, because she rebuffed and he didn't keep trying. He just was an asshole. Don't get me wrong. I think that's valid. Like that's a fucked up thing to do either way. But I did get mad that the movie kind of only blamed it on the spell because he'd shown enough behavior that it felt like, okay, it's partially the spell, right? Maybe. But the reason it turned that way is because he does feel entitled to women and he does not respect them. And you know what I mean? Like that was my initial assumption, right? And then there's a part where when Sarah goes to the girls and she's telling them what happened, she says like, the look in his eyes were like blank. It's like he wasn't even there, right? So the movie is trying to be like, it is the spell, but it just seems like maybe it's not 100% the spell.
I think that was a weak way of the movie trying to just really drive home the fact that the spells are working.
Yeah, and in a negative way, particularly.
Right.
It just doesn't do a great job of any of that, which is why I think, as I think we've all sort of said, like at the end, they haven't earned it at the end. You know what I mean? They haven't earned the three girls, you know, going against Sarah because it hasn't happened. Nothing in the movie made that make sense. They just don't earn a lot of things. They just sort of state them as if we should just accept that that's the truth, especially when they're coming from one person, if that makes sense. Mostly Sarah, because she is our main character. I just thought it was really interesting, probably inspired by this movie. I was really interested in paganism for a little while, so I have some knowledge, it's pretty rudimentary, of neo-paganism in general. And I do find it really interesting that they play a little bit on Christian imagery, where they're kind of like within the kind of exploring of the witchiness of it all. And I wonder if that is to make what they assume is the general public. Because, yeah, there are a lot of Christians in the US more comfortable with it. Does that make sense?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, I sort of think it was done a little bit, I don't want to say belligerently, but as a challenge. For example, the very first scene where Sarah goes to school the first time, number one, she's not wearing a uniform.
Yeah.
She is wearing her plain clothes. The first image she really focuses on is the suffering Christ that's at the front doorway of the school. After a little while, she goes to the magic shop and the camera focuses for a split second on an image of the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
So then we have Nancy towards the end walking on water. And I know that there is many, many, many other parallels of Christian imagery. And I think they are almost intended to be like subtle jabs.
My interpretation of it was more that like putting something that's familiar might make people more comfortable. And I know that in most pagan religions, there is a strong goddess figure of some kind. And so I have heard before about people using the Virgin Mary, right? So that's not like out of nowhere. It happens. But especially when they are trying to say that the lady who runs the shop is like a good guy, right? She's very enlightened. It was almost in a way to signal like this person's good or something. You know what I mean?
Maybe. I don't know. Think about it like this. If they were just in a regular old high school and if they had completely eliminated the, what did you say? Parochial?
Parochial. It says C. Parochial. Yeah.
Parochial aspects of this school, would it have made a difference? I'm here to say I don't think it would have made that much of a difference. Like, they could have gone hard. They could have slammed. They could have gotten real, real nasty with the Christian subversions. They really didn't, except for toward the end when Nancy is walking on water. That one to me was really sort of blatantly obvious.
Yeah.
And even then, you could have removed all the Catholicism from this movie, and it still wouldn't have affected me.
Would have affected the main points, especially, like, of the film. But is there a reason for that? Are they thinking deeply about it when they're making these choices about putting kind of Christian imagery, having them go to what I'm pretty sure is like Catholic school. Are they thoughtful? Are they meant to mean something? Because even if they are meant to mean something, I don't know how clear it is.
It almost seems like it was meant to mean something, but then somebody came into the writer's room at the last minute and was like, whoa, 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 ease up there. Like, I almost sensed a diminishment of what was intended with the whole Catholic imagery and the whole Christ imagery and the whole Mary imagery. I almost feel like somebody came in after the fact and put a lid on it. That's probably absolutely not what happened. It's probably just negligent writing. But it sort of has that feel of someone who has a very controversial idea and is like, I'm just going to come out with it. And somebody else is like, hang on, take a seat.
No, I see what you're saying. I do have to wonder a little bit because this is clearly a bit, at least partially, about this sort of rebellious teen girls, right? And to the, I think, imagery of any parochial school, not just like Catholic schools, but generally speaking, is really buttoned up. And so with them rebelling, it's like an even bigger rebellion. Like, I don't know if that's part of the intention with having it in.
I want to go back in time a little bit in this podcast.
Okay.
Against your point. If they would have punished these girls a little bit more, that's the whole thing. If they would have faced some sort of antagonism from this religious school, the school does not present itself to be, and also I will say the religion does not present itself to be antagonistic in this movie. It's just sort of like a setting.
And it has been a problem in the previous ones. Or at least the first one. Yeah, I get that. The only opposition they're finding is within the student body and not so much the administration. And I do think, I wonder if any of that was at some point in the film. And like I said, they wanted a PG-13, so I wonder if things were cut to...
Exactly. They could have just been in Podunk ISD for anyone gave a fuck for the purposes of the film that we saw.
Yeah.
But for some reason, they are in a Catholic school, and yet it doesn't seem to have any sort of ramifications upon them. No one is ostracizing them. Yeah, they're getting hollered at for talking and shit like that. But they're not being like, put down your tarot cards, young lady. That's going to be 40 laps around the schoolyard. They're not being actively persecuted for their spiritual beliefs. They're just being yelled at for snickering and giggling.
I'm honestly sort of surprised the student body isn't more antagonistic, because there's got to be like people in the school who really don't care for that, because the idea is that people think they're witches, right? So like, why is there not more opposition?
There are legit rumors, like not even rumors. People are just like, oh yeah, they're witches. Stay away from them.
And I just like, again, I go back to my own like high school experience a little on this, where like, people were not nice to me because I wore black sometimes. Like, yeah, I did sort of style myself. Not sometimes. I wore black a lot. Sometimes I wore black lipstick. But yeah, like I styled myself in that same way. And I got way more bullied than they show in this film. I had this one shirt that was Hello Kitty as the devil. And it said Hell-O Kitty. And it was very cute, right? I thought it was cute. And a girl got mad at me because of it. And I was, again, in a public school. So, like, how were they not more hated? Why is there no... I don't know. I realize that they're insular, and a lot of the movie takes place in an insular group. But still, it's really surprising to me.
So, Basil, I had a button on my backpack. And nobody... I do not expect anyone on planet Earth to understand this. But I bought it. I was 14. I bought this button from the local, like, pagan shop. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is the perfect button for me. It said, Lilith wouldn't submit. God always had a problem with that. It was just a white button with red letters, and that's all it said. And me to myself, I was like, nobody's going to fucking get this. But for anybody who does, ha ha ha, take that. And I put it on my bag, and believe you me, somebody fucking stole it. Like,
you think, like, so you didn't have it, or they stole it because they wanted it?
I don't know. I had multiple other badges on and pins on my backpack, and that was the only one that got stolen. So, who knows? But yeah, to add to your point, the antagonism was extremely real if you were not the status quo. That's all I'm going to say.
If you didn't conform to a specific standard that people decided arbitrarily, yeah, this was a time period where it was bad for you, like, to be out of the quote unquote norm. Because, like, that's the thing about this movie. It brings me back to so much.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the local occult store, and there was one that was within walking distance of my middle school. So, like, this came out at that exact same time. And so I used to go there all the time. And unfortunately, I stole from there because I was a bad kid. But
hey, what does she say? Little animals steal from stronger animals.
all the time, yeah.
Even though what she needs to be talking about is fucking Walmart and not the occult shop owner.
Yeah, the, like, small business owner. I'm very sorry. Just kidding. They don't exist anymore, so it's not a big deal. But God, this really brings me back because this does feel a lot, so much. It just makes me feel like high school. Again, my experience was way worse, but I do think it's sort of surprising they don't have much pushback, especially in the administration. That's really the kind of crux of it, I guess.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
This movie, I will say, was extremely formative for me. I have a sister who is not very much older than me at all. I mean, like, as close as you can get to a sibling time-wise. And this was one of our favorite movies when we were in junior high. And I do remember this was like a springboard for so many young girls, especially, into witchcraft and Wicca and paganism. And what is interesting is that it stuck with me for a long time, not forever. It stuck with my sister forever. I desperately wish that I would have had her as a guest. It would have been perfect.
Yeah. It's interesting. My mom is, or at least she was, a practicing pagan for a while. And I don't know when it started, but like I said, there was that local occult store, which I realized it must have been before The Craft, honestly, because we were going into that store before The Craft came out. I was a young kid. And they had those books for kids where they have unicorns and magical animals with those giant eyes. Do you know what I'm talking about? They're like almost pamphlet sized.
No clue what you're talking about.
Yeah, nah.
Let me see if I can find it online.
So when we were children and we saw this movie, we were already sort of like looking for something like this.
When you are different in any way, I think it's very likely whatever comes into your life that celebrates that in some way is going to be influential.
It also does sort of loan itself to like a found family type environment where like we need our fourth. We need each other. Everybody has a specific place. Everybody has a specific role. That is very appealing to teenagers who are experiencing changes in their identity and maybe not necessarily having the smoothest of time with their legitimate real family. And this is what we see with Nancy.
Yeah.
So it really, really does promote this feeling of I have a role to play. I have a group that I'm in. Like, we used to reenact this movie to the whole point of memorization, where we would hold a dagger to each other's necks and be like, it is better to rush upon this blade than to enter the circle with fear in your heart. How do you enter? Which, honestly, hold on, that sounds like something creepy that a DM would say to, like, make you nervous. Like,
Yeah.
It's better to rush upon this blade than enter the circle with fear in your heart. How do you roll me a stealth check?
Yeah. Yeah, it is very full of meaning kind of things, kind of sayings. Yeah. And it feels magical in a way.
Oh, absolutely.
Which I think is part of what kind of captures, I would assume, captured mine and yours and your sister's attention a little bit.
So I have an aunt on my mom's side of the family that is Catholic, and I have an aunt on my dad's side of the family that is Catholic. So I do not claim to be familiar, but I do have exposure. And the aunt that I mentioned on my dad's side recently passed away. We went to her funeral. And it was what's ironic to me about this movie is that we have two faiths that are juxtaposed to each other as like in opposition. Catholicism and paganism.
Yeah.
From my observation, Catholicism and paganism are a little bit parallel.
So a lot of my family is Catholic. We're Irish Catholics. And my mom doesn't really practice anymore. But when I was a child, I did go. It was sort of like passing on the tradition. And my cousins all are, and my aunts and stuff on her side, at least. I don't really know about my dad's. But I went to Catholic church for a long time. I went to Sunday school, which they call CCD. If you are, what that stands for, I don't know because I was a child. But yeah, like I went through my first communion, which is one of the big kind of steps for you in the Catholic church and stuff. So yeah, I'm like pretty familiar with it. This is my memory from at least 30 years ago, maybe? No, it's not quite that.
You've got more exposure than I do.
Yeah, so the Catholic Church particularly is pretty interesting, that there is a lot of ritual to it versus some other denominations I have seen of Christianity. And I guess in a way, like a lot of religions are not. Part of this is probably because I'm an atheist, so I'm looking in now. But there is a lot of things within religion that is just a ritual, right? Like, and you could argue prayer and what, the girls are doing in this movie are not that different in terms of like putting out your intentions.
I keep calling it a wish by mistake, but that's essentially what it is. That's essentially what prayer is. That's what ritual is. It's making your wish an intent.
But yeah, like the Catholic stuff, there is ritual. Like there are a few set things along your path, right? Like as a Catholic that you have to do essentially, right? Like the first is baptism, then you have first communion, then you have confirmation where you're like finally part of the church because you're an adult, but adult in the same way that when you have bat and bar mitzvahs, they're adults. You know what I mean? They're like 13 or something. You're pretty young.
Thing on first right or whatever.
Yeah. And so there is, I think, again, this is like my particular experience, but yeah, there is a certain amount of ritual. Like first communion, because that's the one I actually remember. If you're a girl, you basically wear like a little mini wedding dress, first of all. And it is the first time you get to take the communion, which is supposed to be the body of Jesus. And you get to sip the wine. Of course, it's grape juice. That is the blood of Jesus, right? Like that's the whole thing. And so, yeah, with first communion, I know that it is supposed to be like the first time you get to do that. But there's like a big lead up to it, right? Like they're teaching you, they're making sure that you do like things right. You have to do your first confession before that. Particularly, I remember, so you're supposed to confess your sins. And in my church that I was going to, they said, you have to come up with 3 sins. And I couldn't come up with them. And like, I told the priest that I was like, I can only come up with 2. And he's like, well, find one. And I was like, okay.
I work too hard.
Yeah, I don't know. It really felt like that. You have to come up with something insane to say. But yeah, it is like a whole thing, right? You're not just going and listening to somebody. That is a part of it. Don't get me wrong. You're going there and you're listening to a priest talk about whatever it is that he has deemed the subject of today. But yeah, there is a whole kind of ritual process. The priest goes down the aisle a certain way. There is anointing things, and it's a whole thing. I think one of the places where you can see it the best in media, well, I don't watch a ton of media that specifically talks about Catholicism, but Midnight Mass, they show a lot of that because there's a lot of stuff about Catholicism in that show. Did you want to talk more on that?
I did practice for years. It wasn't just like, oh, the craft is cool. But for whatever reason, it just didn't vibe. I moved on.
I will say I was interested in paganism, but like throughout my teen years, I was searching around, basically shopping around, learning about different religions. Some I still don't know very much about, but like get the gist of.
We got into it. We got invested in it. And as I said, my sister, still to this day, she practices.
It is pretty interesting. I live close enough to Salem. Well, not so much anymore, but it would take a lot longer now. But I did live close enough to Salem that we were able to go there a lot. And that is like kind of a hub for witches.
Kind of.
It's a big hub. I would say like don't go there on Halloween, but like do, but don't. I would say it's worth it like once. Like it's worth it to experience it because there's a lot of activities happening and stuff like that. And that's great. It's a lot of fun, but there are tons of people there. You cannot get parking less than a mile away or something. It is, if you do not like crowds, definitely don't go on Halloween. But yeah, even around Halloween, they have a lot of stuff going on. There's lots of museums. There's a pirate museum. So it's not just witchy stuff. There's also Church of Satan, but...
Hold on. Whoa. I was going to stop you on pirate things, but then you said the Church of Satan.
Yeah. There's a Satanist church there.
Okay, cool.
Or church, because they're basically actually atheists, let's be honest.
Hold on. I'm going to go back to the pirate thing. Are there pirates in Massachusetts?
Not currently. Yeah, there probably was. We were very naval for a while.
Okay.
We were one of the first colonies and first places that people landed in this area.
You can call anybody a pirate.
Yeah. We have like a ton of historical stuff in this area. Like there's Plymouth Plantation, which, plantation. But, you know, there's like old timey reenactors there and there's tons of museums. And Harvard is near Boston. It's Cambridge. But so they have all kinds of very, very interesting museums. Honestly, they have all kinds of collections. They have the Natural History Museum, which I've gone to a bunch of times there. Very cool. Because this area was like one of the first places that people settled, there's like a lot of history, which is great. Anyhow, it's been awesome living here. I love it. I love Massachusetts so much.
Good for you.
Yeah. Anyhow, The Craft. Have either of you ever played Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. I mean, obviously nothing happens. I do think of it, though. I feel like I knew about it before this movie, but that's probably not true. Yeah. I think it was more like a femi type thing. Right. Yeah.
Slumber parties.
Yeah, it's a slumber party thing. As a matter of fact, when she said, have you guys ever played Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board? And they were like, no. I was like, bull the fuck shit.
Yeah, I think that it is very likely kind of a hypnosis a little bit because people will tell you they feel like they are floating and they are, of course, not. But I think the reason they feel that way is because of hypnosis, essentially.
Suggestion.
Yeah. It's interesting because there was a lot of little games we used to play around that age and sometimes the sleepovers, sometimes not. There was this one I used to do where I told this long story in this really like soothing voice. And part of it was me talking about how somebody cuts open your head and I like would put my nail against their head and then put some billion rocks in it. So the person's like laying down with their head in my lap usually. And then I'd tap their head and be like, oh, there's rocks going in your head. And then at the end, I'd be like, okay, sit up. And people would have trouble sitting up.
So we used to do tarot cards, which, you know, I'm not saying they're invalid, but
divination.
We could literally say fucking anything. This is 14-year-old me. I could flip over any card at a slumber party and be like, oh, this one says you're trapped in a prison of your own creation. And she'd be like, oh my God, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. That kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. There's a certain amount of cold reading, is that what it's called, that is going on there.
We need to have, oh my God, you guys, we need to read each other's tarot cards.
Oh my God, I have so many decks because I think they're so beautiful. Plus my mom has a bunch because she's into it.
I will read your tarot cards. I'm very good at it.
Okay, I'm terrible. I just like looking at the pretty pictures. So the Invoking the Spirit book, right? They get a book at that lady's shop. And that's the thing that kind of turns Nancy, particularly when she feels like real power. But when they're buying it, she goes, ooh, that's for like really advanced magics. It's really dangerous.
Right.
And Nancy's like, we're big girls. And she still sells it to her. Like, why would you do that?
This is your fault, lady. Yours.
Like, A, why was it being sold in the store at all if it's so dangerous, right? And B, you can refuse people service. You own the place. Like,
hey, the customer's always right.
It was kind of a pricey book because in the 90s, it was $25, which now it would be like between $50 or $60. It's kind of a pricey book.
I'm glad you brought that up because it did seem initially a little bit jarring to me that Nancy and her mom were jumping for joy over $175, which doesn't even wipe your fucking ass today. But in the 90s, it was probably like double that.
I did look up specific prices. That's why I have some idea. So now, if you got that amount of money, you would have gotten between $343,000, $344,000, which also, to be fair, while it is a good amount of money, it's not quite that jump for joy amount of money, I feel like.
Oh, girl, let me tell you, hang on.
No, I get it. And maybe it's because like there's such a huge housing crisis that I think about that and I'm like, you could barely buy a house with that. Maybe it's just because of my area.
In, I want to say it was 1999, or shit, maybe it was 2000. It was definitely 2000. My mom inherited $250,000. And that was literally like beyond life-changing.
Yeah. I don't think that's not a lot of money. Like, I get that. That is a lot of money to have suddenly. To be fair, it's probably going to be taxed. But, oh, no, life insurance, maybe not.
Well, here's the thing. If you can purchase a house outright, no mortgage, no nothing.
Yeah.
You're good, fam. You're done.
I mean, sort of. There's upkeep costs with a house, whether you like it or not, but.
True. Get a job at Victoria's Secret. Get your employee discount. Whatever. It's like, you're good.
Yeah.
Just do a little fucking side hustle.
Yeah.
You've checked off the big box.
Well, I guess I'm thinking like, okay, they live in LA, which I think is even then was pretty pricey. So I am curious as to be fair, they also get an apartment and not their own home and stuff like that. But no, I mean, I get it. It's a lot of money. I don't want to pretend that almost $350,000 is not a lot of money. Like, that's a lot of fucking money. I get it. I don't know. It felt like they were jumping for like $1 million or something. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm being an asshole.
No, you're not being an asshole because she did all.
I'm a bougie asshole. I'm sorry.
The reason why you're not being a bougie asshole is because she's renting an apartment.
Yeah.
Bad investment.
Why?
Take that money and invest it. Now I'm sounding like a bougie asshole.
Houses are not a good investment. Sorry. I was talking to my mom about that. They're shitty investments. Yeah, okay, you make more money later, but it's basically the same because of inflation. And the housing market can go down. It's so like inconsistent.
But the difference with a house is that you can live inside of it and have it off.
Yeah, of course.
And not pay any more on it. I can live in this apartment for 4,000 fucking years. And it's never going to belong to me. Like, I'm never going to stop.
Yeah, I get that. That is why we also bought our house outright. Because we were luckily in a situation that was possible.
Exactly. And also, she bought a goddamn jukebox with nothing but Connie.
Francis.
Yes.
Yes. It seems like she's blowing the money, which is unfortunate, but their trailer was a mess. If you remember, it was leaking.
It was leaking on her face. It was very pathetic.
Yeah.
But what this apartment looks like to me is a completely empty apartment with one like mod deco couch and one Connie Frank jukebox. The end.
Yeah. And I mean, Nancy's stuff is all on the floor. She doesn't have a real bed. So yeah, that is always a little unfortunate to see. Because here's the thing, even with that wish coming true, right? Like her stepdad being gone, right? And them getting money, that doesn't mean her mom's no longer an alcoholic, right? So her problems are not gone.
Her problems are not gone. Her mom is still making terrible decisions. Yeah.
I'm just looking through my notes. Which one of them says, snakes are cool?
That's gotta be Nancy, right? Snakes were her whole thing.
So it was a double thing. First, it was, Nancy had the snake in their ritual where they each had an animal. And she also makes Sarah see snakes. But that second part is because Sarah mentions essentially her depression before her suicide attempt was psychotic depression and that she was hallucinating. She doesn't say psychotic depression, but that is what psychotic depression is. And that she was having psychosis, essentially, and seeing bugs and snakes. And then during that ritual, before they actually do it, Nancy is playing with the snake and Sarah says something about not liking snakes, basically. And she says like, oh, they're very powerful, so you should respect them or whatever. So it's sort of like a twofold thing with the snakes here. Sarah is already afraid of them because of a previous time where they were beyond a normal level of frightening to her, right? Because she was in psychosis, so things are even scarier. Yeah. And then the snake being kind of a imagery that is supposed to speak to Nancy in a way.
The animals that they chose were very, very weird. If you know anything about the elements as they are presented in most neo-paganism, serpents, I want to say, are usually, and I could be totally wrong, serpents, I want to say, are usually associated with fire.
I believe that's correct.
And then there was Bonnie, she was south, right?
I don't remember. So I remember she must have been air. She was air. That's what I remember.
Right. And Rochelle was west.
She was not air. She was fire. Nancy was air. Bonnie was fire.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Bonnie was fire. Rochelle was
water.
Nancy was air. And
Sarah was earth.
Sarah was earth. Okay. So Bonnie had a bird, didn't she?
I think she had a butterfly, and Sarah had a bird.
My point remains, yeah, I expected those animals to like line up with their respective orientations, and they totally didn't. I did like how Rochelle was water, and her whole thing was like diving.
Yeah, I thought that was clever.
Yeah.
It made the most sense in that it is something that is connected to her personality and the things she actually likes. Yeah. As usual, I looked some stuff up and it was very long, so I didn't really read it. I kind of skimmed it, and it was about the witch that they had on as a consultant for the movie. Her name was Pat something. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up.
Editor Drew here. The name Basil's looking for is Pat Devon.
And she did say something about wanting them to be at different corners or something like that, or that she felt like they did not correctly do the thing, but that for them, it makes sense for Nancy to be the snake because the idea is that she's like the antithesis of Sarah, right? And Sarah is scared of snakes. But yeah, like I think that may have had something to do with it, with the producers or the writers or whoever changing it, perhaps. But yes, they had a person who did practice Wicca which is why there is some genuine witchy stuff going on. And I guess Manon is not a real god. Yeah. And that was on purpose. Basically, it was to make sure they weren't going to offend anybody, like anybody's actual practice.
Separate themselves a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Respectful.
Yeah. And I think that was a good idea. What I do find interesting is, like I said, I'm pretty sure, again, I'm not like the best versed in it, but that usually the feminine kind of aspect of gods is not more important, but a little more revered in a way in pagan religions. And they chose kind of a masculine pronoun, at least for Manon, which I thought was kind of interesting. Is it meant to be because it is close to being like the devil if it's a man? I don't know. There's not a ton of information about those kinds of things. Not like now where you have 50 million interviews and all this information about the making of things. They did not keep track of that quite as well, or it's harder to find nowadays.
I loved when not everything had to be completely 110% justified.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. But, you know, it helps when you are curious. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you're just fucking curious.
Well, and sometimes they just fucked up.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I did want to mention the actors' ages. So I don't know exactly when they filmed it, but I know what their ages were when it was released. So I'm going to give it like a year before, because so usually at least around the time when they would have filmed it. So this is just like most things. It's 20 somethings all playing teenagers. So Fairuza Balk was 21, probably. Robin Tunney, who was Sarah, was 23. Neve Campbell, who was Bonnie, would have been probably 22. And Rachel True was 29.
What?
She doesn't look it at all.
I mean, you know what they say.
Hey, we can't say that.
I didn't say that.
So yeah, it's another, I mean, are we surprised that was particularly prevalent during that time? There's always...
Here's the thing. When I was watching Clueless, I literally felt like, okay, you know how in Friends where they'll do like the occasional flashback episode and it's just Courtney Cox, but she's in a fat suit and we're supposed to believe that she's 16 or 17 or some shit. That's sort of what it felt like for me watching Clueless. Like I was just supposed to believe that this adult actor put on some heavy ass makeup and I was just expected to suspend my disbelief and say, okay, cool. With this movie, okay, it did ask me to suspend my disbelief. And I said, okay. And I did. And it was not difficult. I'm not saying I truly believed that this 29-year-old actress, good the fuck for her, by the way, I didn't believe that she was 17 or whatever. But the movie made it to where I could easily suspend my own disbelief and accept the reality that it wanted me to accept with all of these actors and actresses.
Well, I do think it's not the most fair thing to say, and I don't usually like to comment on people's appearance very much, but I do think the actors here look on the young side, which helps. You know what I mean? Not that I think Alicia Silverstone, she was actually kind of young, but
compared to Clueless, we've got Paul Rudd.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Don't ask me to believe for 1 second that Paul Rudd is in college.
I mean, he's looked the same age for 30 years.
Right.
Yeah, it's always, I'll say, a here or there kind of thing. Like, do you want teens to play teens and be doing things that are maybe like not appropriate for an adult to be asking a teen to do? Or do you want adults doing kind of the same thing, but is a little more appropriate in terms of the working relationship, I suppose? And, you know, obviously, like, to an extent, because I do think that as much as I do like Euphoria, and I do think it's a fairly good show, they sexualize them specifically. Like, I'm not saying don't like show teens having sex or doing drugs or whatever, because that's not unrealistic or anything. But I just find I want it to be less sexualized, less titillating for the audience, right? Because like it's uncool to do that when they are supposed to be basically children, you know?
So here's a good example within the movie. This scene where Nancy seduces Prince and he's like all grinding upon her and he thinks that she's Sarah, which that's a whole nother layer of discussion. You are correct. Yeah. If these were literal like teenage actors, I would be like, because they're adult actors, I guess it's okay. But at the same time, I don't know what it is, but there was something that this movie did that Clueless didn't, that convinced me. My imagination is believing that these are teenagers, even though frontal lobe knows it's not true.
Maybe that's part of your nostalgia.
It could also be the dialogue, I think, is definitely pretty different.
Back to what we're talking about other movies that we've done so far. This movie that came out in 1996, the special effects were on par, if not a little better, than the movie that came out in 2008 that we did last time.
Well,
yeah. They weren't great even in this one, but they didn't try and do anything too big either. What I think is interesting, the part where Sarah changes her hair, it looks like all they did was sort of brush out the saturation in her hair or something. But the thing that I found really interesting about that is because she was wearing a wig the whole movie. So why did they do it like that? So because she was in a movie called Empire Records, which I love and I hope we will do.
I haven't seen it.
Right before this, where she had to shave her head. So I guess that some of the people working on it were like, well, let's just let her have like a pixie cut. That'll be cute. And it'll be like they're rebellious and whatever. But of course, there were producers who were like, no, not feminine. In the interview, they said, we don't know why. But come on. It was producers saying, not feminine. I just thought it was funny that they did special effects in a way where it's like, okay, but she could have just put on a different wig. And it looks like you maybe did something else.
But to Drew's point, let's talk about the butterfly scene.
Yeah, that one was pretty good.
That was pretty good for 1996, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
It felt real. You knew on a surface level, you knew that it was not real, but it felt really good.
Right.
Well, like I said, like I think some of this has to do with what they chose to do. So butterflies are like almost 2D to begin with, is the thing. So that does make it a little easier. And like the floating thing, that has been a magician's trick for thousands of years at this point. You know what I mean? Or over 1,000 years.
Basil, you said butterflies are almost 2D at this point, and that fucking unlocked something for me.
Yeah, their wings. They're not really 2D, you know what I mean? But because of our size and their size.
They're like sheets of flying paper.
Yeah.
You definitely make them 2D.
Well, and I think that's the thing. I think they worked within kind of what they knew they could pull off a little bit. Does that make sense? That the magic that they are specifically showing was things that were not too hard, I think. Or if I'm being honest, a lot of them had been done before to good effect, if that makes sense.
That's good. They did what they knew they had the capability to do.
That's generally what you do. Unlike a certain other movie.
They were just ambitious.
Yeah.
Don't get me started again. Thank you I'm so glad. One thing I love about this is I don't want to say the word forced because it feels like I'm saying I'm being held at gunpoint, but I am strongly encouraged to watch movies or rewatch movies that I wouldn't normally ever. I would never rewatch The Craft. It was in the vault. It was good. I liked it. Happy feeling. The end. And I am very glad I rewatched it.
Yeah. I've gone through basically everything in my notes.
I want to touch on one other thing, just one real quick. Going back to the whole guy with the snake from the beginning. First of all, and don't answer this because I'm not done talking. What the hell was his deal? I get the whole snake tie-in, but it still doesn't make sense to me. And also, he got hit by a truck or something. And afterwards, they were like, we made that happen. We made that happen. We made that happen. But then at the end of the movie, when they were blasting people out of windows, they were like, oh, no, that wasn't us.
To the authority. Sure. I think it does feel a little like the movie kind of says that first death is fine and that the second one isn't. And that's unfortunate because that man was probably homeless and or mentally ill.
I'm struggling to find the connection. I almost feel like he was supposed to have some sort of meaning. Him and his snake, like, hey, I found this outside. Do you want this? He's totally me, by the way. I almost felt like that was supposed to have some sort of tie-in, but that fell short.
Yeah. It seems almost slightly like a warning a little bit, too, because Nancy has the snake symbol, and to warn against Nancy, maybe, I don't know. Because he did say, I had a dream that you were dead. So I don't know if that was the intention. It's pretty interesting because I do think they must have cut something. And I'll say, because there's a part later where she's like with Chris and they say another man's name along with Chris. It's like Sam or something. I can't remember. I should have written it down. And I'm like, is that the name of that guy with the snake? Because y'all never told us that.
You're right.
Yeah.
They're like, we can call the death of so-and-so and so-and-so an accident, but we can't call this other one.
They say it's Sarah being like, oh, it's too much. What with the death of Chris and blah, blah, blah. It's like whatever the name is. I want to say Sam, but again, I don't know. Is there something that is cut out? Like, is there a part where Sarah feels guilty and she looks up the man's name and things about him? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But because of that thing where she says the two names, I'm like, well, oh, does she say Laura? No, she does not. She says a man's name. But because of that makes me feel like there was likely more that they just took out. That's the only explanation for her saying someone's name as if we should know who that is.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, and that's the thing. It would be one thing if he just showed up in the very beginning part, right? Like he's just this random guy and he shows up with a snake and he scares her. And then we understand that she's scared of snakes. Fine. But he does show up a second time is the problem.
All right. Was this Yestalgia for you all?
I'll go. I kind of think it is Yestalgia. I don't think it's like a must watch for everybody, you know what I mean, or anything like that. But it is mostly a very competent and fun to watch movie. Like it has its problems, don't get me wrong. It has plenty of problems. But for the most part, I enjoyed watching it. Like I had a good time when I was watching it. And there was less problematic in it than I thought there would be, which is also helpful. Like I was very worried about it going into it and particularly because this does have a very special place in my heart and was very formative of a film. But yeah, I would say for the most part, if you feel like you want to watch it, if it seems like it's the kind of thing that you would like, yes, watch it. Yestalgia for me.
Drew?
Okay, so did I like this comedy? Because that's the category YouTube has it in. It was okay. I liked it. Like I said, better, in my opinion, better special effects than a certain movie. And so I'll judge it on would I want to watch it again? Not really, though. It's okay for me, but I don't think I want to watch it again. So I guess in that case, it's a nostalgia.
Fair. For me, I'm going to harken back to Clueless once again. I'm sorry, but Clueless has to be my dartboard. So this has actually changed my mind about Clueless. I think I was Yestalgia on that. And after watching The Craft, I do think that has changed my opinion to nostalgia on Clueless.
It was no. You were very
Oh,
much
it was?
against. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm doubling down.
So it's really a nostalgia.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say Yestalgia on this simply because it was easy for me to watch. I was very drawn into it. Out of all the movies that we have watched, Clueless, not Repo, the crazy ass opera, whatever the hell it was called, Clueless has been the hardest movie for me to watch, which I'm bringing up.
Mhm. Would agree. Well, I don't know. Both. I guess because like this movie, it was sort of formative that me saying no was hard. It sucked.
In different ways.
Okay, back to The Craft.
The Craft was extremely easy for me to watch. I didn't have to sort of force myself. I already knew that I liked it and I was not disappointed. I was not disappointed. I was disappointed with a few things. However, it didn't change the way that I feel about the movie on like a deep level. Yeah, sort of like hearkening to what Basil said. If you feel like you want to watch this movie, great. If not, hey, you're not missing anything. You're really not. Yeah.
All right. On to nostalgia. Is there anything new that you want to shout out or mention?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
I'm currently watching, sticking with an anime per episode. I'm watching Akuma-kun, which is a sequel series of sorts to an anime that was adaptation of a manga from the 60s.
Cool.
A half demon who solves cases that always seem to be of a supernatural sort.
Okay.
Yeah. I have not been watching or reading or anything much. I've been very focused on the holidays. But this is very surprising, I think, coming from me too. My husband really loved Yu Yu Hakusho when he was younger. And there is a live action show now. And I've only seen one episode, but it was like surprisingly entertaining. Like I didn't hate it. That's so shitty. Just often my husband and I do not quite have the same taste, especially in anime related things. And so, yeah, but it was like a lot of fun to watch. And I think I'd like to keep watching it. So yeah, it's on Netflix. Amanda, you got anything? It's okay if the answer's no.
I watched myself turn a corner. No, I have not watched anything other than my own computer screen at work. So, yeah.
That's all right.
If you guys want to know the state of accounts payable, just let me know.
For sure. Yeah. Give me that. Give me that shit.
Sweet profit and loss report, baby.
Juicy deets.
All right. So this has been the Yestalgia podcast. Bye-bye.
See you next time.
See you later.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I love his guys. Let's go get a slushie.